Okay, we're going to go over solving systems by elimination again. This is a system because there's more than one equation and there's more than one variable. This little bracket over here, I put that on there because sometimes you will see a bracket around a system. It just means that these two equations go together to make a system. The first thing you need is the x's lined up, and the y's lined up, and the whole numbers lined up. Is everything lined up like it's supposed to be? And then you want to put in one x and one y, because x means one x, y by itself means one y, and then you add up the columns. What do I get when I add up the column? What happens when I add up this column? What happens to a positive 1 and a negative 1? Cancels out, eliminates. And then this would be equal to divide by 3, divide by 3, x equals 3. I'm not finished because these are linear equations. They represent lines on the graph, and I need an intersection point. A point has an x and a y. My equations have an x and a y, so I need to find the x and the y. You go back to whichever original equation looks easier. Some people might think this one is easier because it doesn't have any negatives. Some people might think this one is easier because it has one x and one y. What do you think? Anybody want to pick one? So x minus y equals negative 4. In place of the x, I'm going to put this 3 that I found right here because it says that x is equal to 3. So I am solving for y. And this cancels out. I made a math mistake. Do you know what my math mistake is? What's wrong with adding 3? Will that cancel out a 3? What do I need to do right here to cancel out a 3? Now will my 3 actually cancel out? A positive 3 cancels out a negative 3, and this is negative 7. I'm solving for y. I need to cancel out the negative. Y equals 7. You write your answer as an intersection point, first x and then y. So everybody got that? Okay. But what if they're not lined up right? Do I have my x's lined up and my y's lined up and my whole number lined up? Lined up? Lined up. This first one is in standard form. It starts with x. So I'm going to add 4x to both sides. I'm going to bring down the first. This is just the first one. I just rewrote it. And this is the second one after I add that to both sides. Now I can't add the 4 and the 6 together and get 10 because one has an x and one doesn't. So I have to write down the 4x and the 6x, and over there I had a 9. I added 4x to both sides so that I can have my X column and Y column, and if I add my what makes something cancel out? I have to have a positive 4 and a negative 4. I have to have a positive 6 and a negative 6 to cancel something out. So it still doesn't cancel out. So I have to take charge and make it cancel out. I have to choose. Am I going to choose to cancel out the X or cancel out the Y? That is my choice. Sometimes on problems it's easier to do one or the other. This one, it's about the same either way. So I am going to choose to cancel out the X. Now, if I'm going to cancel out the X, what number am I going to need right here in this spot to cancel out the 4? A positive 4 is not going to cancel out another positive 4. I need a negative 4 right here. What am I going to have to multiply to get a negative 4 right here? I'm going to have to multiply this by negative 2. And when you multiply, can I just multiply this by negative 2? When you multiply, you have to multiply everything by negative 2 in order to keep the equation balanced. I'm multiplying negative 2 to get a negative 4 right here, but I got to multiply everything else. And so I'm going to do that right here. Negative 2 times 2, negative 2 times 3, 4 times 2. This was positive, positive, positive. Now it's negative, negative, negative. I'm checking my signs, and I'm checking my numbers. This one doubled, this one doubled, this one doubled. And then this is equation number 2. Write it down so I can add up my columns. Now, what happens when I add a negative 4 and a positive 4? This cancels out. What happens when I add a positive 6 and a negative 6? Just because of what these numbers happen to be, all of that cancels out. When it cancels out, what it's doing is zeroing out. My X is canceled out, my Y is canceled out, and I have left 0 equals 1. No, it cannot. That means the answer is actually no solution. If the X cancel out and the Y's cancel out and you get a false mathematical statement, then it is no solution. What that means is the lines were parallel lines to begin with, so there's not an intersection point. But the first step is to line up your X's, line up your Y's, line up your whole number. Okay. Is everything lined up in this problem? Do I have my X's lined up and my Y's lined up and my numbers lined up? Everything's lined up. But is anything going to cancel out? Nothing would cancel out because I don't have a positive and negative of the same number. Because of the numbers in this problem, it will be easier to cancel out the Y. What number would I need right here in order to cancel out the Y's? I have a 3. They're both the same number, but I need one positive and one negative. So I'm going to need to multiply that by negative 1 in order to make it. If I multiply that one by negative 1, what do I have to multiply this one by? What do I have to multiply that one by? Now, sometimes instead of seeing it written down like this, you will see it written down with parentheses around the whole thing and a negative 1. What that means is I'm going to multiply everything by negative 1. a little bit neater than writing all those separate negative ones. That's what it means if you have a parentheses around the whole thing and a negative 1. This gets multiplied by negative 1. This gets multiplied by negative 1. Don't forget, this gets multiplied by negative 1 also. Negative 1, negative 1, negative 1. Everything got multiplied by negative 1. Bring down this equation. I didn't do anything to it, just rewrite it. And add up the columns. What do you get when you add up the columns? What happens here? Cancels out. These have opposite signs, so you subtract them and take the sign of the larger number. Not finished yet. I also have to find the y. Go back to one of the original equations. This one might be a little bit easier because the numbers are a little bit smaller. And in place of the x, I'm going to put the negative 2 that I found right here, because it says right here that x is equal to negative 2, and so in place of x I put a negative 2. This would make it a negative 10. I'm solving for y. What am I going to do with the 10? To cancel out the 10, subtract them, take the sign of the largest number, and then divide by 3. What you have found is the intersection point. So write your answer down as an intersection point. The first thing you need to solve a system is the x's need to be lined up, the y's need to be lined up, and the other number needs to be lined up, the whole number, the constant number. If it's all lined up, then will something eliminate? If I add up the columns, will something eliminate? No. So I have to choose. I've got to force it to eliminate. And in order to force it to eliminate, I've got to choose, first of all, which one I'm going to eliminate, and then figure out what I need to multiply to make the elimination happen. So I am going to choose to eliminate the y. No, I'm not. I want to choose to eliminate the x, because most of the time we eliminate the y. So I want to do the x. I want to eliminate the x. So what number am I going to need right here to eliminate the x? And so I've got to multiply all of these by negative 3. When you put the parentheses around it, it means you're going to multiply all of it by negative 3. I didn't do anything to the first equation, so I'm simply going to bring it down. And then I'm going to multiply this one by negative 3. And minus a minus makes a plus here. And I'm going to add up all the columns. What's going to happen when I add up the x's? That's why I multiplied by the negative 3 to make these cancel out right here. And when I add up that column, and when I add up this column, answer to this is not no solution. You can get no solution when the x's cancel out and the y's cancel out, and you have the 0. Did the y's cancel out? Do I still have a y? I can solve this for y. The answer here, some people think that because they see a 0, that means there's no solution. That is incorrect. I'm solving for y. I cancel out the negative. 0 divided by -1 is 0. 0 is a perfectly good number. And now I need to find the x. This looks like the easiest equation to me. And in place of the y, I'm going to put a 0, because right there, y is equal to 0. What's x plus 0? Anything plus 0 is the anything. Make sure that when you write your answer down, your answer is in x, y order. 0 is a perfectly good number. It is part of our answer in this problem. So do you understand why there's that this one actually has a solution? Just because there's a 0 in there does not mean no solution. It's no solution when the x's cancel and the y's cancel. And our favorite kind of problem is a word problem. Now, when you have a word problem, unless this problem doesn't tell me which variable to use, to pick which. What do you want to use? You want to use x's and y's or something that goes with the problem more? So if I use x's and y's, I might let x equal the adult ticket, and I might let y equal the child ticket. Now, I assume that you don't want to copy all of that down, so let's underline the important part, and that's what you can write down. This much for 2 adult tickets and 3 child tickets. You don't have to write the whole thing down, but write down the underlined part, because that's going to be what makes the equation. And the second family has $105 for 1 adult ticket and 2 child tickets. And we have to write down the equations, and we're going to solve them. So, for the first family, 2 adult tickets, and we're going to use x for the adult tickets, and 3 child tickets equals $180. For the second family, 1 adult ticket and 2 child tickets equals $105. Now right here it said, what is the price of the child ticket? Which letter stands for the child ticket? We do not want to cancel out y because that's what we are trying to answer. So what number am I going to need right here to cancel out the x? What number has to go here to cancel out the 2? I'm going to need to multiply by -2 to cancel out the x. I don't want to cancel out the y because it specifically asks for the child ticket. So I have my first equation, just rewriting the first equation. This equation I'm going to multiply by 2. Excuse me, I'm going to multiply by negative 2. There's the first equation. I multiply the second equation by negative 2 so that my x's would cancel. My x's cancel because I have a positive 2 and a negative 2, and that cancels each other out. I'm solving for y. What am I going to do next? What does it mean y equals 30? 30 what? 30 tickets? No. $30? Huh? No. What does Y stand for? It is child tickets, but it's not the number of child tickets. It's the price of the child ticket. So you should finish your word problem by writing a sentence explaining what the 30 means. The child ticket costs $30. So you should finish a word problem by writing out a sentence saying what that number stands for as far as the problem goes. Did this problem say that I had to do an adult, did it ask me the adult price? I could substitute back in and find the X, which stands for the adult ticket, but it didn't ask me to. So I'm only going to answer what it asked. And on some of your homework problems, it doesn't ask you and the Y. Some of them ask you just to find the X. And some of them ask you just to find the Y, kind of to make the problems a little shorter. There's a final example to look at. These are not in standard form. Do you know what kind of form these are in? Yeah, y equals mx plus b, the slope-intercept form. And so, even though it's not in standard form, are my y's lined up? And the x's lined up? And the numbers lined up? So I can use elimination from this form also. What you have to have in elimination is that the y's lined up, the x's lined up, the numbers lined up. So now, I need to choose. And I'm going to choose to eliminate the y. And to eliminate the y, I've got to have, of course that would be a 1s in here. I'm going to have a positive 1 and a negative 1. So I am going to multiply that first one by negative 1. That would give me a negative y. Negative times negative would make a positive. Y equals 2x minus 5. And this would have a 1. I multiplied this first one by negative 1, and then I wrote down the second one, and then I'm going to add up the columns, and what's this part going to be equal to? It cancels out, and it's equal to 0. 3x minus 12. I'm solving for x. I need to add 12 to both sides. To cancel that out, running out of room, so I've got to go over here. Now, I found the x. Now I need to find y. I don't know, maybe the first one looks a little easier. Go back to the first one before I did anything to it. In place of the x, I'm going to put a 4. Now, this negative was already here. And so in place of the x, I put a 4. And so negative 4 plus 7 is, make sure when you write down your answer point that you write it down in x, y order. Hold on just a second. These are the steps to solving by elimination. You line up the terms. You have to have inverse coefficients. You've got to have one positive and one negative of the same number to eliminate. After you eliminate one variable, then you find the second variable.